Here's our review of the Misplaced Modifiers worksheet. Please feel free to come talk to me with any questions that you might have, and I'll go straight to it. To reach our seats, we had to climb a steep flight of stairs, which were surprisingly comfortable. Remember, we're looking for clauses or phrases or words that are misplaced. Adjectives and adverbs need to be as close as possible to the thing they describe. Words like which and that frequently begin subordinate clauses, but you don't need to know the terminology, you simply need to recognize the mistake. And what is it that's comfortable here? Certainly not the stairs. To reach our seats, which were surprisingly comfortable, we had to climb a steep flight of stairs. Number 2, Nina is a spunky woman who has almost had every problem that one can imagine. Our mistake here is the word almost. If we say she almost had every problem, that means she missed out on having these problems, and that's not what we mean to say. Rather, we're meaning to say that she had almost every problem. She'd had just about every problem one can imagine. She didn't almost have them. 3, he gazed from the window of the train at the girl in the lavender suit with great interest. Here we have too many prepositional phrases in a row, but beside that, this one is completely in the wrong place. With great interest is describing how he gazed. This is an adverb phrase. And what we really need to know is that that phrase belongs either here or here. With great interest he gazed, or he gazed with great interest from the window. 4, the ballerina acknowledged the applause of the audience, holding an armful of spring flowers. Here we have a participial phrase, another ing-ending verbal form, but this time it's not a noun, as in a previous exercise. Rather, it's functioning as an adjective. And it's not the audience holding an armful of spring flowers. Instead, it's the ballerina, and we need to be as close as possible to her. Holding an armful of spring flowers, the ballerina acknowledged, or the ballerina holding an armful of spring flowers acknowledged. 5, at the shareholders' meeting, Mr. Thurston used a bar graph to clearly and succinctly explain the company's rate of growth. We must always watch out for split infinitives. To explain is an infinitive verb and belongs together. It should not be split, and we need to move these adverbs outside of the infinitive, and we'll put it right here to explain clearly and succinctly the company's growth. Number 6, my cousin Horace and I used to enjoy countless double features with a good supply of popcorn. Another misplaced prepositional phrase. This time it's an adjective, and it's describing my cousin Horace and I. With a good supply of popcorn, my cousin Horace and I used to enjoy countless double features. 7, every Saturday afternoon we crowded into the Old State Theater to see good triumph over evil with our friends. Good did not triumph over evil with our friends. Rather, this is how we crowded into the theater, an adverb phrase, and we want to put it right next to the verb. We crowded with our friends into the Old State Theater. We might also put it here accurately, into the Old State Theater with our friends. Moving on. 8. Moreover, it seems as though we nearly saw every cartoon Hollywood had produced. We didn't nearly see it. If we nearly saw it, we somehow missed out. But rather, we saw almost every cartoon. We saw nearly every cartoon Hollywood had produced. Placement of the word really changes the meaning of the sentence. My father used to say that one needed great stamina to, from beginning to end, see that all movie houses had to offer. We have another split infinitive here, to see, the prepositional phrase right in the middle. We can't do that. Rather, we should put it right after the verb. It's an adverb phrase, right after the infinitive, to see from beginning to end all that the old movie houses had to offer. 10. A gold necklace was the groom's gift to the bride, found in an antique shop in New Orleans. Here's a clause that needs to be moved. It's not the bride that was found in an antique shop in New Orleans. Rather, it was the gold necklace that was found in an antique shop in New Orleans. Number 11, the girls sat around the pool sipping soft drinks in bathing suits. Another misplaced prepositional phrase. This is an adjective phrase, and it doesn't matter that you know what it's called. What you need to know is that it doesn't describe drinks. Rather, it describes girls. The girls in bathing suits sat around the pool, or in bathing suits. The girls sat around the pool, or the girls sat in bathing suits around the pool. 12, Brian took the athletic department's van to the mechanic that needed a brake inspection. Here we have a subordinate clause, starting with that, as they frequently do. Brian took the athletic department's van. It's not the mechanic that needs a brake inspection. Rather, it's the van. He took the van that needed a brake inspection to the mechanic. 13. As most of us remember, a great deal was written and said about Columbus's discovery of America in 1992. Another misplaced prepositional phrase. It's telling us when, so it's an adverb phrase. But he didn't discover America in 1992. Rather, it was in 1992 that a great deal was written, or a great deal was written and said in 1992. We had scarcely driven 2 miles before seeing the exit for the Science Museum. If we had scarcely driven, that means we didn't drive, or we drove in a funny way. Instead, we drove scarcely 2 miles before seeing the exit. 15. The 2 small boys were riding bikes wearing bright green helmets. Another participial phrase or participle phrase. It's not the bikes that were wearing bright green helmets. Rather, it's the 2 small boys. I might put it here. Wearing bright green helmets, the 2 small boys were riding bikes, or the 2 small boys wearing bright green helmets were riding bikes. The man walked along the riverbank carefully looking for specimens of wild flowers. And number 16, the word carefully really changes the meaning of the sentence depending on where you put it. And here we just don't know what you mean. So it may be that the man walked carefully along the riverbank. That makes a lot of sense. Or it may be that the man walked along the riverbank looking carefully for specimens of wild flowers. 17, Brad has called the travel agent about booking a flight to Portugal more than once. We have to ask, what has he done more than once? Not booked a flight to Portugal, but rather he's called the travel agent more than once about booking the flight. 18. In the latest census, the population in that metropolitan county appears to have more than doubled. Hey, there's nothing wrong. Beautiful. 19. Maureen almost packed everything she owned for a week's trip to Costa Rica. She didn't almost pack. That means she didn't get around to packing. Rather, she packed almost everything she owned for a week's trip to Costa Rica. The landscape company has pruned the hollies recently planted behind my apartment building. Now the question becomes, what was recently done? Did we recently plant the hollies? Probably not. Rather, it's more likely that they have recently pruned the hollies. Straight on to exercise 60. Same stuff. Finchley tripped and almost fell on the scatter rug. So here we have a prepositional phrase, and did he fall onto the rug or did he trip on the rug? Which seems a more likely solution. 2. The stories in Homer's Odyssey may well have first been recited to small groups of listeners, introduced to many of us in English 201. The listeners were not introduced to us in 201. They've been dead for thousands of years. Instead, introduced to many of us, the stories of Homer's Odyssey, or the story of Homer's Odyssey, introduced to many of us in English 201, may well have been recited to small groups of listeners a long, long time ago. Number 3, the trumpet player who uses this practice room regularly appears with the small jazz band on weekends. Here we have another word that really we don't know what it's meant to do unless we place it differently in the sentence. The trumpet player who regularly uses this practice room appears, sure, or that he appears regularly with a small jazz band on weekends. But depending on the placement of that word, we don't really know what you mean to say, or what the writers here did. Number 4, to once and for all settle the dispute over the landline, my neighbors agreed to have the property surveyed. We have another split infinitive, to settle. We can't split to settle up with these words once and for all. We need to put it on either side of the infinitive, to settle once and for all, or once and for all to settle. 5. The hikers had nearly climbed 2 miles when they remembered their lunches left behind in the back of the van. They didn't nearly climb 2 miles, they climbed nearly 2 miles, which really changes what you mean to say. 6. That man hurrying up the escalator now is looking for his wife and daughters who were in the sportswear department. No, it is not now that he's looking, he is now looking for them. 7. We walked across the narrow footbridge with the other tourists swinging above the river. So what is it that's swinging above the river here? The tourists? No, certainly not. It is the footbridge. So swinging above the river we walked swinging above the river across the narrow footbridge. 8. Mary stood on the curb waiting for the bus, lost in thought. What's the question? What is it that's lost in thought here? Certainly not the bus. Rather, it is Mary. So lost in thought, Mary stood on the curb. Number 9. Before finding the pewter bracelet, Kim had only looked in one store in Westlake Mall. Had she only looked and not called or checked the internet? Rather, I think they mean to say she looked only in one store, rather than all the other stores where she might find the thing. 10. My grandmother is a long admirer of A.E. Housman, who still attends poetry readings. Mr. Housman does not still attend poetry readings, but grandmother, who's presumably living, probably does. My grandmother, who still attends poetry readings, is a long-time admirer. 11. We could count on a crowded bus at the end of the day when people were eager to get home. At the end of the day is describing when we could count on it. We're probably best served putting it at the beginning of the sentence. At the end of the day, we could count on a crowded bus. 12. After the cold front passed through, the thermometer dropped almost 20 degrees. Correct, so we don't need to spend time talking. Page of exercises. Mother wants to put the new plaid sofa in front of the fireplace, which is to arrive any minute. Here we have another subordinate clause. It's describing something in the sentence, but the fireplace isn't going to arrive any minute. Rather, it is the sofa which is to arrive any moment. 14. She says that we barely have enough time to clear a path for the delivery men from the furniture store. Do we barely have, or do we have barely enough time? Which makes more sense. 15. This old sofa could tell many a tale about the family, obviously beyond repair. Now, this could mean a lot of things, and we might mean that the family's beyond repair, but we probably mean to say that it's the sofa. This old sofa, obviously beyond repair, or obviously beyond repair, this old sofa could tell many a tale. 16. We are looking forward to visiting the cottage where Franklin Roosevelt stayed over spring break. Franklin Roosevelt didn't stay there over spring break. Rather, we are going to visit over spring break the cottage. 17. My favorite personality who appears on Channel 10 in the mornings forecasts the weather. In the mornings is telling us when he appears, and so we want to put it as closely as possible to that. My favorite personality who appears in the morning, or it's telling us when he forecasts. We're not really sure which verb it's describing unless we place it properly. So it may be that he forecasts the weather in the morning, it may be that he appears in the morning, but we must be clear. 18. Tina just bought enough donuts for each of us to have one with a cup of coffee. Did she just buy them? Like a second ago she just bought them? Or did she buy just enough donuts for each of us to have one? And with all of this, we can probably assume that it's just enough rather than just bought. Number 19. It was good of Clarence to take the small terrier to the veterinarian that he found in the park. Here we have another subordinate clause. So what is it that he found in the park? Definitely not the veterinarian. Rather, it's the small terrier. We need to put adjectives and adverbs, in this case an adjective, right next to the thing they describe. The last one, we merely saw a trace of snow on the mountaintops. Merely is a really weird way to describe how you see something. However, we do see merely a trace, and that makes a lot of sense. So that's a misplaced word. And that is our misplaced modifiers.